Hello and welcome to Be Indie Now, a podcast about independent game development. I'm your host, Tobiah Marks, and with me today is JJ.
Hey, how you doing?
So you have a company called Capital J Media.
Yes, yeah. It's a game studio, but started off with
So
film production. The company going.
so when did you start it?
So it took different iterations. I mean, originally when I graduated film school in 2000, I started Capital J Films, which was just only film production at the time, and I worked in the film industry in Canada, doing documentaries, TV, videos, any kind of independent projects I could do, things like that. And then I eventually came down to the States. I did some film work here as well, and then in
What year was that?
2006. Around then, and then 2011 or so, I started getting into game production. I guess the end of 2010.
So what got you into
And
games? Why the change?
experiment to see do that. I've always had a couple ideas for games. Well, I've always been interested in games, and when I was young, I started designing games on paper a lot. So I would do. I didn't do any programming or any kind of. I didn't have any kind of computer background for that.
So are you making like board games, or are you just kind of writing documents of digital games that you would make in the future?
Yeah, board games and kind of or RPG sort of games, or the kind of thing that got me started into this is actually a game that's I don't know how I would classify it, but it's a paper kind of game. So you would actually draw out on a piece of graph paper where the positions of your different ships and your units and stuff were, which translated onto a computer game much better than even just a paper game. And so that's kind of what got me. I always had that game in the back of my mind and always tried to figure out a way to do it. And then once iOS kind of came out and started doing allowing app submissions, that's when I started thinking about it more seriously. And I started looking into hiring people for it to see if I could put this game together for that. But I had a hard time trying to find the right programmers and trying to find a technology for it. And so this was kind of early when the App Store first opened. So it took me a few years after the App Store opened until I started just doing it myself, and a lot more tools became available to kind of let somebody that is new to programming or to game development to get into it. And so I found those tools, and I figured out that, well, it's not quite as impossible as I thought it would be to get into this stuff and to learn how to do it. So I taught myself how to do that.
So what tools did you start out with? Did you just do like straight Objective-C code at first, or?
And game released, which is.
What was that?
No, I mean, I looked into Objective-C and into Xcode and everything, and it was pretty overwhelming. And I don't think it's very friendly to people getting started in programming or even in game development. Mm-hmm. So I found a tool called Game Salad, which is kind of a very simple tool for 2D game development. And within a month or so, I kind of had a working prototype of the game that I wanted to make. But I was running into these issues where Game Salad really only supported, because it was a visual sort of system, there was no actual coding component.
It's pretty limited on what you can do.
Right. Yeah, so there wasn't really much you could do with it beyond just kind of a few basic mechanics. Once you started putting in more variables and things started.
Were you working by yourself at Game Salad?
Complex the system at that point, and it wouldn't run.
Were you working by yourself, or you say you got other people involved?
No, at this point, I was just working by myself. And it's a simple enough tool that I think anybody can pick up and quickly learn it. And so I was just really playing around with it, just testing to see if could I make a game by myself without any kind of programming experience or background.
So how many games did you make in Game Salad? Just one?
Well, no, I never even finished that game in Game Salad because I started running up into these problems where the game would I mean, it got to the point where every time I would add a new variable, it would take like a minute or two for the game system to even process that or open certain screens.
Oh yeah, game styles tutorials are being really slow too, especially if you have a lot of objects on the screen with a kind of a battle sim thing that you were doing.
Right. Yeah. I didn't know that at the time that would be kind of limitations of it. So I started looking around for other alternatives. At the time, there was, I think, Torque was out there too, which
I
was
think
a
Torque
popular
might
system.
still be around, but Unity is better.
Yeah, yeah. So there was also Unity, and so I was looking at all these different engines and options out there, and testing them out. And I spent a little bit of time trying to figure out which of these would be best. And then, so Unity was kind of an interesting. So I chose Unity, but it was an interesting jump because this was a 2D game. Unity wasn't really made for 2D games at the time.
Yeah, it was long before the 2D stuff came out.
Yeah, there wasn't really anything in there. It was you had to kind of hack it in or use these third-party systems to be able to work with sprites and stuff. So it was an interesting choice. But I kind of thought that in the future the game would go 3D at some point, or that I would want to get more into games that are 3D or have a tool that is going to be a lot more flexible in the future. So I figured I might as well learn the one that offers the most flexibility for games.
So what year is this around? This is like 2010, you're saying, or earlier?
Yeah, the end of like 2010, beginning of 2011 is when I started with Unity.
Yeah, this is like when iPad is just starting to get big.
Exactly. This was just when iPad came out, and so I made the game iPad only at the time because it was kind of a strategy game, and it needed a bigger screen than would fit on an iPhone screen. So it was that was another factor, was just the iPad seemed like a perfect device for kind of a touch strategy game that wasn't too complex, but also was a little bit more advanced than casual games.
Well, this is a good time to take a moment and let's describe the actual game. It's called Battlefleet.
Yeah, sure. So Battlefleet is a naval strategy game set in World War II. It's turn-based, top-down, and the game takes some of the elements of games like Worms or Scorched Earth, where you set an angle and a power and fire your weapons. So, but in this case, you control a fleet of ships, and ships can also move. So the original game let you start out with like 3 ships, and then eventually I expanded that so you can control bigger fleets. But each one of those ships also had a selection of weapons on it, and you can control any of the weapons. And so you would set the angle for the weapon, the distance that you would want, and try to hit the enemy. So it kind of combined a strategy element of having to move your entire fleet and outmaneuver the enemy, along with setting up your ships, picking the weapons for those ships, and then with the kind of more arcade sort of aiming mechanic of something like Scorched Earth.
Is this designed for the single player experience or for a multiplayer experience?
Originally, it was released as a single-player game, so it had a campaign in it. It had single-player battles and custom or quick battles and things. And then eventually, I added a multiplayer component on it with Game Center, so it would let you play online. It always did have multiplayer, just hot seat, so you could always play with somebody on the same device.
Is it asynchronous multiplayer or real time?
Real time. The turns are pretty quick. They usually took about a minute or so. And at the time, asynchronous wasn't really that popular, or there wasn't really much happening with it, and I didn't know anything about it either. So
fair enough reasons.
Yeah.
So this is your first game project you've worked on after doing film for at this point 10 plus years. How is games different than films, right? They're fundamentally apples and oranges, right? But tell me about that experience switching.
Yeah, sure. So while I was making the game, I was still working full time doing film production. So it was kind of a mix of both at the same time. But the differences between the two mediums aren't really that big. I found that it's basically kind of the same artistic or creative outlet, in that you kind of design a story or a theme around some sort of a creative element, and then the process of actually putting it into place and creating the creating the object, creating the product is also very similar, I found. In film production, you also, you take your first few months to write the script and do the set up the production, figure out all of your kind of put all your pieces together before you actually start doing a shoot. Then you have the period of production, which is usually a month or something for, or let's say a film, or maybe 2 months for like a feature film or something. And then you have another 6 months or so, or maybe even longer on a lot of films of editing. And so that's kind of part of the production process as well. And so I find that in game development, it's kind of the same thing. You take the first little bit of time to plan out and design your game, whether documents or prototyping or something like that. And then you take that and you actually put that into production. And in terms of creativity and in terms of working with people and finding people to work with you on the project, and in terms of freelancers, especially in the indie world, it's very similar. You'd still kind of find people that are getting into game development that want to work on, say it's an indie game, they want to work at a lower rate or something, or people volunteer, or sometimes people get together and work on a project just for free to get like a film or a game out there. And I find that dynamic is very, very similar. So it was very natural for me to jump into the game stuff. The differences are that you don't have to rely on the weather in game production. So if it's raining,
games work rain or shine. I guess there's certain games that involve going outdoors and location based that might be an issue, but many games doesn't matter.
That's true. But also, rain isn't necessarily a deal breaker in those cases. But in the film production, it can definitely kill your day. You don't have to work with too many unions and things, so you don't have to get all kinds of permissions and permits for working in different parts of a city or in specific locations, things like that.
Oh man, I never had to deal with like unions before. That would be a really big deal as a filmmaker.
Yeah, it's
unions everywhere.
It's not even just the fact of dealing with these things. It's also the fact that learning how to deal with these things, finding the connections, and finding out what is the process of getting a film permit to film in a city, or to get permission to film in somebody's building or house or something.
Yeah, I did a booth at PAX, and I had to deal with unions then, and like city laws and out-of-state taxes. And I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. But it's probably nothing compared to what you go through on a daily basis, having to just get a location to shoot and getting a camera out.
Yeah, until you're done the actual filming process, you're dealing with that all the time. Once you get into the post-production and the editing, then things ease up on that end a lot. At that point, then you have to deal with more kind of the similar things that game production has to deal with, like getting rights for music or sound editing, things like that. So then it kind of gets more similar.
Did you know any filmmakers who are also into games, or are you completely outside of the games industry?
No, I was completely outside of it. I didn't know anybody in games at all, and nobody that I know. None of my filmmaker friends or colleagues have gone over into that, into making games either.
Haven't been able to convince them, hey guys, this is fun. You don't need to worry about unions.
Yeah, I should. That's probably my selling point. I should just tell them, hey,
you could probably have a better selling point than that. Games are cool besides that.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too is that with film production, you pretty much, with a very few exceptions, you can't go out there and just make a film by yourself. You can't, grab your camera, grab a laptop, and just go out there and make a film. There's a few things you can do in terms of some short films or a music video or a documentary or something light. You could maybe do that by yourself, but for the most part, if you're talking about any kind of any sort of narrative-based film or process like that, you can't really do it by yourself, between having to get a whole crew for it, but then also the actors to do the performing for you. So it becomes, there's a lot of management to working with a really big group of people. And that's something that in games, with indie games at least, you could avoid to a certain extent. If you could do pretty much everything yourself. There's a lot of examples of games, obviously out there that people just do everything themselves or do 99% of the work or 90% of the work by themselves. You could just grab your laptop, sit in a coffee shop all day, and code, and after a few weeks, you could have a game out there. So that part is like another kind of difference. Is you sort of have a little bit more freedom with game development.
So when did you actually release Battlefleet 1? In like 2010, 2011?
2011, I believe, is it feels like a really long time ago now. But yeah, I think it was summer of 2011.
So you got out there, like, what did you do? You just released it and told your filmmaker friends, like, hey, go download this app. Did you try and market it more?
So I actually did have a bit of a marketing plan beforehand. When I first had the idea for the game, and then I was kind of more serious about getting started into it, and I was looking for programmers and kind of just getting it going. I also put together a game review website that I started growing over that time. So this was maybe a period of a year or so until I actually started really working on the game. So then another 6 months until I finished the game. So about a year and a half, I had this website out there that was reviewing iOS strategy games, specifically iOSstrategygames.com. And so I was using that kind of to build up an audience of people that loved iOS strategy games.
So you built this review site specifically so that you can put house ads and advertise your game when it came out.
Exactly.
I mean, were you enjoying doing the reviews anyway and playing other strategy games? I suppose that sounds pretty fun by itself.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, a lot of times, if I didn't have time to do a review, or sometimes it wasn't kept up as much as a regular game review blog might be. But between myself and some help, once in a while to keep the site going, and the audience started growing in it. So when the game launched, I kind of had that audience ready to attract.
How big of audience was that? Do you mind sharing? Like, are we talking hundreds of people, thousands of people?
It was around 10 to 15,000 unique visitors a month.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so it wasn't big enough to get any kind of advertising revenue or anything. So the only purpose really was to use that to help promote Battlefleet. Mm-hmm. And it was a nice site too. I mean, it covered a lot of fun games, and we had some strategy guides and stuff for games that were popular at the time, like Field Runners and things. And those are some of our really popular pages, like how to beat levels and stuff. So,
Cool. So how did the Battlefleet launch go? Did you get a bunch of downloads right away? Was it more of a slow process?
Yeah, it did pretty well. I mean, for what I was expecting, it did a lot better than I thought it would. I kind of just made the game because I wanted to make it for myself, and I wanted to see if I could do it and have it out there. I wasn't really expecting to have it make a whole lot of money or anything. And but when it was released, I think one of the positive things was that the iPad only kind of apps section was still a little bit smaller. So even though I didn't get featured or anything, it still brought in a lot of sales and a lot of downloads. Mm-hmm. So it did the typical long tail where the first month was a lot of sales, and then it slowly kind of creeped down from that. So it was pretty good. So it did enough to cover all of my costs in it, and put aside some money for future games. It wouldn't have been enough to be a full-time income or anything. So there was kind of a business. There was also an audience for this type of game.
How much did you sell it for?
But it ranged. Usually it was $4.99, $3.99, that kind of area, and then I would do sales every once in a while for like $1.99.
Why did you start at the higher price point as opposed to starting at like a $2.99 and then selling down to 99 cents?
I thought it was kind of more of a premium type game. I knew that the audience for it was definitely a lot smaller than most of the people using iOS devices. It wasn't going to attract those people that are looking for 99-cent games. So I kind of, in looking at other games out there that were similar, sort of in a strategy and a bit more targeted niche kind of genre type of games, they usually had a higher price point, so I based it off of that.
So you weren't making enough money for it to be a full-time income, but how were you treating your development? Was this just like a hobby thing you were doing on the side at nights for fun? Or was this something that you really wanted to make this your full-time job and make filmmaking the secondary job?
It was still a hobby at this time, but it was starting to be something that I could explore as becoming a bigger part of either my film production business or move into it a bit more full time and more aggressively to make it more central to my business. But I sort of wasn't sure at that time yet. So I still kept on my my film work, and I cut down on some of my film production so that I would have more time to dedicate to games. But I still, at this point, I didn't jump into it all in. I kept my film production going until I could get to a point where it really would bring in a full-time revenue or have game contracts or something like that.
All right, so we're in mid-2011. You launched Battlefleet. It made back its cost, but not full-time income. What's the next step?
So the next step was trying to experiment with other things. And this wasn't necessarily maybe the things that I've learned now is it might not have been the best approach to be able to keep an audience going because I jumped into starting to do other types of games. And I think this is something maybe that a lot of people get into is especially, creative game developers or filmmakers, you have a lot of ideas, and so you want to kind of try out all kinds of different ideas, and but trying out different games in different genres might not be the best business decision.
Yeah, because you can't really build one audience and transfer them over if you have this
Very
hardcore
kind of mystic decisions.
audience.
You want to try something new.
Yeah, because you have that hardcore sim audience, they might not be into the next game. So what kind of games did you work on? Like what kind of categories?
So I did a kind of a little casual shooter sort of puzzle type game. It's called Cube Smash. And that was just sort of an experiment, playing around with physics and seeing, just if I could make something quick and fast. And that game took, a lot less time to make, maybe around 2 months or so.
Also done in Unity?
Also done in Unity. I've pretty much stuck with Unity for everything that I've done since then. So I did Cube Smash. I released that as well. It didn't do very well at all. It still made some money, but the development
it still
cost
made
was
some
nothing.
money. That's a good, good stance right there. There's a lot of games out there that make no money. So what else besides Cube Smash did you work on?
Absolutely. So I did that, and obviously the audience didn't translate at all for that. So then I started working on. What was next? So the next thing I actually wanted to do is bring Battlefleet to Mac or PC. So I started looking around at kind of desktop platforms, and so I went back to Battlefleet a little bit, which was smart. And next summer, I ended up releasing the Mac version on the Mac App Store for Battlefleet. And it didn't take too much work to kind of get it over into Mac because Unity makes it a little bit easier to port to the different platforms. So I did that, and then I got really lucky, and Battlefleet ended up getting featured on the Mac App Store. So so that really helped, and then the game went up to the #1 game on the Mac App Store after a few days. So it did pretty well there. Of course, the Mac App Store is much, much smaller than the iOS App Store, so having the #1 game on there doesn't mean you're making the same kind of money you're making on the
No, but it's
iOS
also a lot
apps.
easier to get to #1 on a
Yes.
smaller store because you can kind of build that smaller community and have it launch you up the charts, and so you're going to get those natural downloads for being high up.
Exactly. Yeah, it worked really well. It stayed up there for a bit, and it made a lot more money in a lot shorter period of time. So then it was something. Now I actually had kind of some reserves to put into a game and start to hire people. So then after that, that was out there, and the sales from that started to fade away. I started working on a new game, which was in a completely different genre. It was a space action sim shooter called Starbase Gunship. And the idea is you're in a spaceship defending the space station that's being evacuated from an.
So is it also kind of a strategy game?
So you're not actually moving or controlling the ship. All you're doing is controlling the aiming.
I see.
No, it's an action real time game. So you're aiming and kind of in a first person perspective, aiming and destroying the enemy ships as they're coming at you.
How
But
long was
it's
your development time for these side projects? Like a couple months in each one, or are you taking like 6 months to do them?
Yeah, Cube Smash was, about 2 months or so. To update Battlefleet for Mac took maybe 3 months or so part-time work, and Starbase Gunship took about 4 months. It was still mostly part-time, but I also had some help on it, so I was able to hire a developer and some artists on it. So that helped speed things up. So that one took about 4 months. It's still a pretty simple, sort of a little bit more of a casual action game, something like Battlefleet. So we ended up launching it in December of 2012, I believe. And same thing kind of happened as with Cube Smash, because it was a completely different audience. I couldn't use any of the people that were playing Battlefleet weren't interested in something like this. So it was sort of as if I just started from scratch.
How about that review site? Did you maintain that at all after the initial launch of Battlefleet?
Yeah, I do maintain it, and I still maintain it now. It's not as much as I'd like to, but I do keep it up, and it still has traffic, and it still sends traffic to the game. So that's the nice thing is it's kept Battlefleet. Battlefleet never faded off completely, like a lot of games. Like my other games, Cube Smash or Starbase Gunship, they kind of faded off to a point where they're or something income, partially because of that, partially because I also do some other advertising that I keep up a little bit, and so it's something that's never quite faded away. It's not very high, but it's still every day. There's
Tell me about that other advertising. I'm curious.
So I tried a lot of different things to advertise, from Google AdWords to advertising on actual game review sites and things. And I found for the most part, it was never really worth the, except for doing some sort of like a burst thing when a game comes out. Most of them weren't worth the amount of sales they actually brought in. But I did find a few sort of more niche places that ended up having a much higher return. So there was a site called iPad Board Games, and that the audience from that site apparently is a lot more suited to Battlefleet. So that's something where I've kept up, and I keep ads on there most of the time, kind of on and off, but I still do advertising there. And then there's a few other sites like that as well. So I kind of the key with that really was to find sites that were very, very niche or very, very well targeted to your audience, and those were the ones where the actual ad spend was worth it to keep the sales coming in.
Yeah, it was really good of you to calculate not just, hey, I'm buying X many ads, getting X many eyeballs, but which eyeballs specifically are going to see it. You get the highest return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at this point, we're at late 2012. You just launched a space action game. Now, what's next? What did you do in 2013?
Right. So Starbase Gunship was launched. It didn't do as well as I was hoping for, and I tried to do a lot more press and kind of promotion for it. But partially that same audience from Battlefleet didn't kind of continue over, and it just didn't have very much of a response. So it made its money back in terms of the expenses that I actually spent on hiring programmers and things, but it didn't really make anything above that. So I was thinking at that point, I was like, I'm not sure, if how big of a component, if I can keep doing the games full time or get into it full time, or if it's still going to have to be kind of a side project. And then what ended up happening with Starbase Gunship was actually a developer of another game series, a PC game developer, ended up seeing the game and liked the game, liked the way that it was developed and the design, and we started talking, and they ended up hiring me and my company to do a mobile game for them that was kind of a mobile version of their PC game, but at first it was going to be just a companion app to their PC game that they were developing, which was a sort of massively multiplayer first-person shooter, and then it ended up growing into its own game that took place in that same environment and in that same universe that they have. So so it ended up actually becoming a full-time project that had a nice budget with it, and I could hire on more developers, and we ended up working on for the next year, and we just released it last February.
That's pretty cool. So you were able to go full time because they hired you to contract and they paid your full time rate.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, we worked out a deal for the full development of the game, and basically my studio took over the entire production process. But we had access to a lot of their assets, so we didn't have to start from scratch. So we had access to their art assets and things, and we had to just take those and make them low res to make them mobile friendly. And but in terms of the actual game and the design of the game and everything, that was basically created pretty much from scratch. And
that's a great situation.
Yeah, so I ended up, we were able to we co-designed this game with the owner of that studio, and but I basically got to run the whole process and really make a lot of creative decisions, have a lot of creative input, which was really nice. It was a very stressful project too, because it was kind of a big production, and we were trying to put in a lot into this game, have a lot of content, a lot of and also try to squeeze in something, try to make the game work on mobile when it was very resource intensive, so it still had to work on older mobile devices. So that was a lot of challenge to do that. But yeah, the game came out in February. It's called Line of Defense Tactics, and it launched on multiple platforms at the same time. So we did iOS, Android, Steam, Mac, and Amazon, I think.
So did the Tactics version come out on Steam in addition to the full MMORPG that they were making?
They're still working on that.
Oh, okay.
So
this kind of like came out before.
Yeah, so it's partially it's kind of a promotional tool for them to get people into that world, into that universe that they're making in their game, and partially also as a kind of a standalone game to expand on that universe.
What about post-release content? Were you just contracted to like make the basic game and now you're done with it, or are you continuing to update it, add more content?
Still working on some additional content for it, and also releasing it on other platforms as well, like Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. So we're working on that a little bit as well.
How big a team do you have?
It's during the production, it was there was 2 programmers, myself, I was also doing a lot of the programming. They weren't full time, but they kind of switched off full time and part time. And we also had a couple of artists, a 3D modeler, a concept artist, and a UI studio that we brought on to do the whole UI for the game.
And is that your team, or is that also like their team integrated, or were you working with their team at all?
No, the UI studio is a separate company that we hired, that we worked with on Starbase Gunship previously. That I worked on Starbase Gunship with, and I liked the work that they did, and so I ended up hiring them to do the UI for this game as well.
Very cool. So what's the reception been?
It's been pretty good. So the game was featured on iOS and Mac app when it launched, so it became pretty popular, rose up in the ranks pretty high. Android, I don't think it's been featured, and the other platforms, PC platforms, I'm not sure about that because I'm not kind of dealing with the PC side of the distribution. So it's been received very well. Most of the best reviews, in terms of, we've gotten a lot of good reviews and things. So Pocket Gamer gave it 8 out of 10. A lot of nice reviews. Most of the best reviews we got were for the mobile version. Most of the kind of negative reviews, or the negative aspects of the reviews, were for the PC version. And partially that was because a lot of people seem to feel that the game is more of a mobile game that was ported to PC, even though we developed both, at the same time, with an intention of releasing on both at the same time.
It just feels more like a mobile design.
Yeah, I think maybe because it's a little bit more touch oriented. The UI and the interface was a little more directed towards touch. It's still, is perfectly playable and plays just fine on PC controls, but it doesn't have some of the same UI or kind of design traditional systems in place that a lot of games of that type would on PC. So it's kind of missing some of that maybe element, and we ended up doing an update to the game that we released last month, and it helped address some of those issues too.
I'd be interested to see how it works on when you get it on Windows 8 too, since there's a lot of touch devices with Windows 8, and so there's kind of this assumption that people are more used to that touch interface.
Yeah, absolutely. We offer both options, so you can use PC, you can use keyboard and mouse, or touch on Windows.
Very cool.
We're having some with Unity on Windows 8, but hopefully it'll work out.
What kind of issues are you having? Different plugins or?
Yeah, mostly we can't get gesture controls to work very well. So pinch and twist sort of gestures, and that might be down to the plugins that we're using for it. We've tried a few different systems, and I guess the downside is there's kind of no all-in-one touch sort of solution that works for all platforms. So you get one system that works great maybe on iOS and Android, but it doesn't work on Windows 8, or it doesn't work on Windows desktop, which can also run touch devices. So kind of managing those different sort of plugins and systems is a bit of a challenge.
Well, it sounds like you'll be able to. It sounds like a very solvable problem to get through too. It's just have to figure out what issue of plugins causing what compatibility. Or I don't know exactly what the bug is, but it sounds like it can do pretty well there. So what's next besides?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that's it's just kind of working.
So besides post-release content, what else are you going to be working on? What's coming down the pipeline for Capital J Media?
So the current thing that I'm working on right now is Battlefleet 2, and so this is the update to Battlefleet.
It's going to be going back in circle all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So partially because that game has been fairly successful, and also, I haven't really done a lot of updates for it over the last year because I was working on this other project, and I feel like the audience for it is starting to drift away a little bit. Oh yeah, so Battlefleet 2 is going to be all redesigned from scratch. It's using 3D right now, so instead of Battlefleet 1 was just a flat 2D game. So Battlefleet 2 is now going to be a fully 3D. All the models and terrain and everything are going to be 3D. So the biggest change visually is definitely the visual change of the graphics. There's also a lot of gameplay things that I've learned over the past few years with it to make the UI a lot better, make the interface a lot more friendly to use and faster to learn. That was one complaint about the original Battlefleet, is the interface was a little bit clunky. Mm-hmm. So that's something that's been greatly improved. And that looks fantastic too. Use the same studio as on last two games.
Are you still going to target the same hardcore audience, or are you going to try more casual features? Or go for a more casual audience, I mean.
No, it's still mostly the same audience as before, some more of the hardcore kind of strategy audience. It's definitely going to be more accessible now to people that are a little more interested in casual games or shorter or faster gameplays, because it's going to be easier to learn for them. But the core of the game, it remains kind of true to the original sort of strategy and wartime sort of simulation genre.
So what else has changed about the game project? Like you have new art, you have new interface, you have new three-dimensional, but is it always basically the same core idea? You're just kind of getting through those basics, or you're kind of picturing this as a whole nother game?
Yeah, so most of the core ideas are the same. So it's still the same: set up a fleet, move your fleet, turn-based kind of top-down view, and selecting different weapons to fire. But some of the new elements are, because the islands and the terrain is now 3D, that allows for a fog of war element. so you can now hide ships and behind terrain, and that covers the ships to prevent them from being fired on. There's also kind of an expansion on the aircraft and the airstrike features. I've put in a new thing for being able to salvo fire, so you can now fire all your guns at once you found your target and found the correct aim for your target. So that helps speed up the gameplay a little bit. You don't have to fire each gun individually anymore. Two other changes are that the turn-based system is now ship turn-based. So instead of you having to move your entire fleet and then the other player moves their entire fleet and then you move your fleet back and forth, I've changed it around so that you now move one ship at a time. So it speeds up the turns a lot faster, and it prevents people from getting into a position where somebody's fleet is going to move in to firing range before you had a chance to fire, and they can sink one or two of your ships before you even could get a shot off. So it kind of improves that element of it as well.
Yeah, that makes it more rapid turns, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, yeah. So they switch really, really quickly back and forth, and there's a strategy element to it now as well, because you can assign captains to the ships. So each captain has an experience level, and depending on kind of the captain you choose, they might have some other abilities and things too. If you choose one with a higher experience level, they'll be able to move their ship earlier in the turn. So you kind of weigh that choice as you're setting up your fleet. Do you want some special ability from the captain? Or do you want somebody that's going to make your ships move earlier in the turn?
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and then the other really big element is the change to the campaign system. So the original game had a linear-based campaign, a story-driven campaign, so it was one mission after another, and very strictly scripted. And those were fun, but they took a lot of time to design kind of scripted content like that. And they also didn't provide a lot for replayability. So this campaign is now going to be more of an open world axis and where you have a layout across the Pacific Ocean and you have to conquer all the enemy territories. And how you do that is up to you, which territories you want to move your ships into. You get to move your fleet across the entire Pacific Ocean and decide which islands you want to take, what kind of ships you want to build in your ports. So it really expands on that element.
That sounds really cool. It's definitely a much bigger scope than the last one.
Yeah, I think it's not that much bigger in terms of the actual development, because it kind of balances out some of the other things. So doing kind of a linear narrative campaign, there's a lot of time investment into actually scripting those missions and then testing each one of those missions and making sure that they're all fun, that they're very well balanced. And adding new content to that has a lot of challenges as well. But this kind of open world takes time to develop the system and have everything work together. But then once it's kind of done and tested, it takes on its life of its own, and updating it or expanding that system becomes a lot easier in terms of adding new types of ships, new types of weapons, things like that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gives a lot more replayability. You can play as either side. You can we can add in more scenario kind of based stuff where you have certain objectives or goals. Take over Japan or take over Midway or something within this amount of time. So it kind of has more flexibility once the actual core system is designed and put into place.
So let's talk money, though. How are you funding it? Are you taking your previous money earned from Battlefleet and your other games? Are you taking money earned from these outside projects?
Yeah, so it's a combination of those things. Some from the original the business, but I've also did have some independent investors that were really interested in the game that were able to put in a little bit of money to help kind of make the process go faster, so that I could get the production out and get the game done quicker and get something out to that original audience as fast as possible. So that really helped speed things along. So the game would have been done one way or another, but getting that extra bit of support from outside investors helped speed things up.
So where's the game in the development process right now? Are we early alpha? Are we getting more towards beta?
Yeah, it's kind of in the alpha stage right now. Most of the game is functional, multiplayer, and most of the kind of battle components are all working. And The UI is in a mostly completed state. A lot of the artwork is done. There's still a few things to be done there. The biggest part that's still left is probably is the core of the systems are in place for that, but a lot more testing has to go into that, and a lot of tweaking in terms of the balance and stuff of the kind of ships that each side has and things like that. So that's probably the biggest thing left, and that should be done within the next month or two.
Very cool. Very exciting.
Yeah.
All right, so we're about, let's see, you got your first game out in late 2011, 2010, you say. It's about 3-4 years ago. You started with Battlefleet. You're going back to Battlefleet. You have a time machine. You can go back in time. You can tell yourself what? What advice would you give yourself?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, on the surface, I would say, the biggest thing that I've learned from people and from meeting other game developers and going to conferences and kind of learning more about the game development process is to nurture and build an audience. And once you kind of have some sort of an audience, keep building that, keep growing with it, at least until the point where you can kind of make this a sustainable business with that. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned is at least business-wise, it would have been very smart to stick with that same genre or the same kind of audience, creating other games based on that original Battlefleet or other World War II kind of war games. That would have been great for business. But I think if I actually did have a time machine and go back, I probably wouldn't change anything, because the process of doing all these other projects in between and learning the different technology, to develop programming that was useful for a real-time game, that kind of stuff is it's hard to quantify, just as what the financial value of that. I think the value of learning all those things and having those experiences is worth a lot more. So in reality, I probably actually wouldn't have changed anything, because everything sort of worked out the way that it should have for me to learn how to get into game development and kind of how to make this into an actual business.
Yeah, you learn a lot more from so-called failures than you do your successes most of the time.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think one thing that, a lot of times people get down on, with independent games fail all the time, or, they put out a game, they put all this work into it and it didn't make any money or anything. But a lot of times it's not necessarily just the actual pure financial reward. I mean, it's between the learning process, but also the other things that come around that could come from that game, whether from exposure or, getting another contract or something, having something to show. Another company that you might want to work for, you might want to work with other people, and having something to show them. And I think that's the value of that is really, really, is really important. And a lot of times, people can forget that. But that's one thing that I would suggest to other game developers is getting into it is don't treat it like a failure. If the game didn't make any money, try to find the positives that came out of that.
Absolutely, excellent advice. Thank you so much for being on the show and telling us your development story. I always like to wrap things up talking about games we've been playing lately, in addition to games that we've been making. For me personally, I've been traveling a bunch, which is why there was no show last week. So apology to the listeners. But because of that, I've been on the plane. So I was playing Plants vs. Zombies 2 finally. I was a big fan of the original, but I hadn't really gotten a chance to sit down and play it. And it's been updated a bunch at this point, so it was actually a really nice experience going through it again and falling back in love with the zombies. Are you into any of the PopCap games, or are they more too casual for you?
I'm definitely more interested in kind of strategy stuff, but I've played a whole range of casual things. So I played Plants vs. Zombies and a lot of tower defense stuff, especially the old Field Runners games. More recently, some of the things I've been trying out are Monument Valley for iOS. It's kind of a puzzle game. I've heard really
good things about that one. I haven't had a chance to play it yet.
Yeah, it's a beautifully done game and really impressive. I think it was in Unity as well.
I believe so.
So that's something played recently. The other thing is This is kind of a really obscure sort of game. It's called At War. It's a browser-based kind of giant version of Risk. So having an entire all the countries in the world split up into a giant online game that takes hours and hours to do one playthrough with kind of a more advanced systems than Risk would use, and that's kind of a really fun game.
Sounds like good research material right there.
Yeah, that's what I was doing, actually. I started when I was trying to figure out what to do with this little campaign thing for Battlefleet 2. I wasn't sure whether I would redo the same thing and do kind of a linear story again. And I started looking at other kind of games that had a strategy sort of Risk type world domination approach. And I found this game that way, and then I got hooked on it.
Yeah, just that's how you learn. Just try new things. Try making new things, playing new different games. You get inspired, and those ideas will make your games better.
Yeah, that's really great advice too. Absolutely.
If you want to find more about me, you can go to tobiahmarks.com. That's where I have a blog and blog posts that have hopefully interesting information to indie game developers. If you want to find more about the show, you can go to beIndieNow.com and look at past episodes, show notes, things like that. You can follow me on Twitter at Tobiah Marks or the show at beIndieNow. Where can we find more about Capital J Media?
Sure. Well, I just wanted to say that also listeners should go back and listen to the past episodes because they're really great. It's a great way to learn a lot about game development is to listen to all the past episodes of this show.
Shucks.
Well, it's good research.
Hey, that's my goal, right? I'm sorry, I'm talking all over you because of the lag. Here, go ahead. Where can we find Capital J Media?
Oh, sure. So you can find Capital J Media at capitaljmedia.com. So that's CAPITALJmedia.com. And you can find out about Battlefleet at battlefleetgame.com.
Perfect. You got a Twitter account?
Yeah, it's at JJonas. So at JONASZ.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being on the show, JJ. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Sorry for the lag there. We've had a couple connection drops, so if there was any pauses, I apologize for that. And for everyone else, go out and make some games.
Thanks so much.